and west. Iraq was broken on the wheel of economic sanctions because of the need to demonstrate the unacceptability of the acquiring of other people's territory by force. It was broken on the wheel of sanctions. 1 million Iraqis died, most of them children, most of them dying before they even knew that they were Iraqis, but dying for no other reason than that they were Iraqis. On the grounds that no regime must be allowed to acquire weapons of mass destruction. Iraq was broken because of the need to impose the authority of the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. But Israel has occupied other people's territory by force for decade after decade after decade. Israel, we know, thanks to the whistleblowing of the brave Israeli hero Mordechai Vanunu, who spent nearly 2 decades in solitary confinement for telling us Israel is in possession of hundreds of nuclear weapons and the missiles with which to land them on any and all Arab capitals. Israel sits on top of a mountain of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Israel has broken more United Nations Security Council resolutions than all of the other countries in the world put together. Yet, Israel is not subject to economic sanction or invasion. Thanks to the United States of America, Israel is endlessly rewarded with money and weapons and political and diplomatic support precisely for its breaking of all 3 of these. We may not see it that way. Indeed, in the United States, it seems to me, precious few people see it that way. But I can tell you, in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, around the world, that double standard is as plain as can be. The second thing which had to be done to drain this swamp was to end the agony of the Iraqi people. I went to Iraq in 1993 and 1994. I had never been to Iraq before. It was the only Arab country I had not visited. I would not have been welcomed there if I had. Indeed, I would have been arrested as a known and vociferous opponent of the Iraqi dictatorship. I used to be demonstrating outside the Iraqi embassy in London when British ministers and businessmen were going in and out, selling them guns and gas. I never take any lectures from anybody about the dictatorship in Baghdad. But you see, when I went there in 93 and 94, before there was any oil for food program, when there was mass starvation in the land, when the suffering was literally unbearable to watch, which is why so few Western politicians went there to see it. I saw mass funerals of little children who were dying at the rate of 1 every 6 minutes of every day and night. I listened at the door of the labor ward in a hospital in Baghdad as a woman gave birth by caesarean section without anesthetic, for there was no anesthetic to be had. when I went there in 93 and 94. I was very clear, as was a brave American politician called David Bonnier, a Democratic Party congressman, once the chief whip on the Hill. I haven't heard of him for a long time. I assume he's been defeated and is out of politics now. He described this policy as infanticide, masquerading as politics. And that is exactly what it was. And I argued after 9/11 that as well as changing course on the issue of Palestine, we had to end this crucifixion of the people of Iraq, because we have fallen out with the dictator that we helped into power. We armed, we made strong, we encouraged to attack Iran and invade it to halt the Islamic revolution of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And the third thing we would have had to have done was to stop propping up the puppet presidents and the corrupt kings who rule the Muslim world almost without exception from one end to the other. Not one of whom would be in power for 5 minutes if it were not for the military, political, diplomatic, financial support of your country and mine. Which is why Muslim people don't know whether to laugh or cry when they hear George Bush and Tony Blair talking about liberty. The masses in Pakistan, for example, who one day had a general who had seized power in their country, who wore a uniform, who was subjected to an arms embargo, who was suspended from the British Commonwealth, who was routinely described, indeed memorably described, by President Bush just before the election, you may recall it, just before his first election, when he was asked in that wonderful question and answer session about the names of world leaders with whom he'd have to be dealing in a few weeks. And he was asked, well, who's the ruler of Pakistan? He said, the general. And the interviewer asked, do we have a name here? General who? And Bush answered, we just call him the general. Well, of course, very soon they stopped calling him the general. He stopped being a military dictator who had seized power illegally, exiling and imprisoning his opponents. He became not General Musharraf, but President Musharraf, a great and wise statesman who must be given all the weapons and all the help he needed to follow Washington's orders all the more precisely. Indeed, he was even allowed to acquire what? Nuclear weapons, the very pursuit of which, fruitless as it turned out, had led to Iraq being crucified and 1 million Iraqis slaughtered. Or we could look elsewhere. We could look next door to Palestine, to the great state of Egypt,